My name is Arian Zwegers. I work for the European Commission indeed. I'm actually replacing a colleague, which is Ragnar Bergström, who is Swedish. So I'm sorry for that. I don't speak Swedish, therefore it will be in English. As Johan showed, they're doing a roadshow in Sweden about Horizon 2020. We are also doing a roadshow about the Future Internet-PPP Phase 3. This is the second but last event that we do, and I think it is number 31 or 32. So actually we've had many of sessions like this, promoting the Phase 3, explaining what it is about, because it is different, and that's probably the key message I want to give to you today. This is not, let's say, FP7 research as normal. It is different. The players we target in Objective 1.8, and I will go in more detail much later on, is different. Johan mentioned closed club. We know that there is a risk. We know that there is a perception that people think it is a closed club, but we definitely do not target the same kind of organizations in Phase 3 as the ones that are in Phase 1 and Phase 2. So actually we need other kind of organizations in Phase 3. And the second message that I want to pass to you is that this is a program approach, meaning you will not be the only project. You are not working standalone, you're part of a larger whole. And again, I will give more details about that later on. Now, I would like to start with some background. This is a slide showing the quarterly revenues of different companies in 3 different regions, in the US, in Asia, and in Europe. And we looked at these 50, 60 companies, and you should think about companies like, let's say in the US, Apple, Google, in Europe, Siemens, Nokia. So large ICT companies, but not telecom companies. And these revenues are pictured here. Now you see a trend. Before the crisis, so around 2007, until after the crisis, 2012. At least in some countries that was after the crisis. What is obvious here is that there's a big difference between the figures from the US and Asia on the one side and Europe on the other side. In Asia and the US, these revenues went up 2012 compared to 2007, roughly 50%. And in Europe, it more or less stayed the same. Now, of course, the question is, how come? Why this big difference? This was analyzed, and a particular conclusion was drawn, which I depict over here. They say platform-based businesses on any possible device are outperforming in sales and profit than any other ICT business. In other words, certain companies have certain business models based upon, let's say, platform thinking, and it shows that these are, in this particular example, outperforming these other businesses. Now, of course, this is a small sample, it's perhaps not fully representative, but it shows at least in some way a particular trend that you see in business. These platforms which are there. And I will go a little bit in more detail here. By the way, this is the background is from Easter Island. This is called a Moai, and this part over here is called an Ahu, which is also like a platform. And for the Easter Island people, this Ahu is actually very important, perhaps even more important than the Moai. It's the sacred ground. You're not supposed to go there, you're not supposed to touch it. Now, what is a platform? First of all, a common base. Think, for instance, of the car industry. In the car industry, you have different product families from which different models, different variants are built. What is this common base? For instance, you have the same chassis, the same powertrain, the same software for all the different models. So there is a certain common base, a basis for the whole product family, and different models are instantiated from that. It is kind of openness, meaning it is open, but not fully open. Some parts are kept private, but it is also, and some parts are open, so people can, and that's the next, one of the next points, people can build upon it. Like the chassis example, you can build upon it, you put a carrosserie and so on top of it. There is some research done on differences between a platform and a product, and there are 3 main characteristics. One is it needs to provide an essential function, so it needs to have a role in a larger whole. if you like. And this function, for instance, for the chassis example is pretty clear. Well, it's obvious what the function is. And the second characteristic is it should be easy to build upon. So you need to provide it with well-defined interfaces, and people should be able to use it, know the interfaces, and build upon that. And the third characteristic, it should be difficult to substitute for. If your competitors have a competing platform and your clients can go tomorrow to their platform, yeah, it does not really provide a lot of value. So you don't want people to be easy to change that easily. Now, these are just some characteristics from theory. And why is this important? That's largely because of network effects. Now, you have what is called one-sided network effects and two-sided network effects, or multi-sided network effects. One-sided network effects, an example is, for instance, the telephone system. When the telephone was invented, the Italians say it was by an Italian, the Americans say it was Graham Alexander Bell. He was actually kind of a lonely guy. He could not call anybody else because he was the only one with a telephone, obviously. Now, then more people started using it, and more. And the value of using a telephone thereby increased. The more people use it, the more valuable it becomes. That's the characteristic of network effects. Now, this is one-sided. You only have one system, which is a telephone. But think about two-sided systems. And credit cards are a good example of that. If you're a MasterCard or you're Visa and you want to issue a credit card, what do you need? You need shopkeepers who accept your card, and you need to have users, people like you and me typically, who are using the card. So you have two communities. Therefore, the term two-sided effects. And you need both. If you only have the shopkeepers and no users, doesn't work. If you only have the users and no shopkeeper accepts it, doesn't work either. And here you see the same network effects. The more users have your card, the more interesting it becomes for shopkeepers to accept your card, and vice versa. The more shopkeepers accept the card, the more interesting it is for users to take that card. That's why you see advertisements, Visa, most accepted credit card, and so on. Now, why is this relevant? It explains also different business models, like, for instance, the freemium business model. This is a picture taken from a nightclub where you have two kind of communities, the boys and the girls. And the girls get in for free and they drink free. And why is that? Well, the boys are paying for it, obviously. So you have different rules for the different communities. And in this case, the boys subsidize the girls. You see the same, for instance, in, let's say, in the electronics industry a few decades ago with competitors from Asia, which had their home market and a foreign market, and they had different strategies. The home market was kind of subsidizing the foreign market. Same kind of thinking. And obviously, you also see it in the smartphone wars nowadays between Apple on the one side, Android on the other side, and some other players there as well. Now, what if you want to get such a platform? As I explained to you before, once you have the shopkeepers and the users via the network effects, it becomes more interesting to have that card, so you attract more shopkeepers and you attract more users. It's a kind of rolling snowball, so to say. And then the question is how to get this thing started. If you start from scratch, if you don't have the shopkeepers, if you don't have the users, how do you get it started? So it's a chicken and egg problem. Where do you start? And also, who's going to pay for this? Now, that's where, let's say, we step in. And if you break it down, you can divide it in 3 different questions. So how to get the platforms to start with. And in the PPP, we addressed that issue. How to get third-party applications. And again, that's where phase 3 of the Future Internet-PPP comes in. And also the users. That's not really addressed in the PPP. That's up for the third-party applications and for the platform owners coming out of the PPP to address. So phase 3 clearly plays a role here. Now, that's a little bit background theory. How does it look like in the future Internet Public-Private Partnership? For those of you familiar with FP7 research, it's typically either one of the two. It's either applications research, so for instance focusing on e-health applications, energy applications, and the research focuses largely on how do you build different technologies there together, how do you really employ them. And then there is also ICT technology research, really focused on the technology and how new technology can be built. On the one side you have an application pull, and on the other side you have a technology push. In the PPP we try to bring that together, so we have both the application side and we have the technology side. Therefore there are also two different objectives. You see that on the right. The first one is the application objective. How can you use different technologies to make the world systems smarter? And smarter can be the way you want to define it. More efficient, more effective, more productive, more innovative. Second objective is related to the technology dimension. How can you make the European industry a world leader in future internet-related technologies? So, coming up with new technologies, marketing them, using them at the application side, and trying to promote industry which owns these technologies. So this is the global picture of the PPP. Now, who has never seen this picture yet? Never seen? Okay, good. This is the central picture of the Future Internet Public-Private Partnership. It shows that it is a 5-year program, starting 2011, running probably into 2016, with 3 different phases, and the 3 different phases correspond to the 3 different goals. Now, let me explain a little bit how it works and why this is a program and not a set of projects. We started with 8 different use cases in different areas. For instance, the first one, finest, is in logistics. The second one, instant mobility, well, the name says it. It was about transport and mobility of people. So 8 different use cases, looking at different application scenarios in their respective domains, coming up with requirements, and then interacting with this project here. Fireware is what we call a technology foundation project. They look at the technology solution for the requirements coming out here. So there are dependencies, links between the projects here and, for instance, this one. The requirements from the use cases were brought into the technology project, which then came up with solutions, which were fed back to the use cases, where they were implemented in proof of concepts, demonstrated, and so on. And feedback was given to this project. Now, in addition, you have the Infinity project, which is looking at different infrastructures. It made a catalog, an inventory of different infrastructures in Europe, and I will go in more detail later. Also, Concord is there. This is the longest project. It runs throughout the whole duration of the Future Internet-PPP, and this is meant to facilitate interactions, to support the whole program, do communication, do dissemination, and so on. Now, that was phase 1. Beginning of this year, April this year, we started phase 2. And that consists of these 5 application projects. Some of them built upon the use case projects here. Some of them are new. For instance, the Fitman project is about manufacturing. And this was a topic which was not in the first phase. So these 5 projects are going a step farther than the original use case projects. They're really going towards trial sites, towards application platforms, and towards building applications on top of their platforms. Sci-Fi is the 6th project in the second phase. This is about infrastructures, and again, I will say more details about that later on. And the third phase, what we are talking about later on, that starts well, roughly middle next year, and this is about expansion of use cases. Now, to come back to what I said before about the different platform theories, it looks a bit like this. As I explained, the Fireware project is looking at different technology solutions, and they come with different technology building blocks. different platform components, different components that can be used to make these application platforms here. Now, what also plays a role is also obviously the use case scenarios. How do you want to use the different technologies? How do you, what scenarios do you have in these different domains? And then the infrastructures or capacity building, as it is called, also comes together. So in phase 2, the different activities in phase 1 come together, are being brought together into these application platforms. And these will then be brought towards phase 3 for the world at large, SMEs and web entrepreneurs, to build applications and services on top of these platforms. This is a little bit the thinking behind. Now, just a quick slide about phase 1 and the different domains there and the different projects there. There was a project on environment, finance, logistics, and so on. So here you see the different domains that were covered there. What I said before, what they did was they came up with different requirements and application scenarios in the different domains. Then these requirements were discussed with other projects, especially the Fireware Technology Foundation project, where there was a decision made whether this is a generic requirement, meaning it is common for all kind of domains, or it is a specific requirement for a specific domain. If it is a generic requirement, it requires a generic solution, which is called a generic enabler, and this was implemented then by the Fireware project. If it is a specific requirement, it requires a specific solution or a specific enabler, then it was implemented by the use case project itself. So the distinction generic-specific was made in that interaction. And these use case projects ended up with different conceptual prototypes where they brought together the generic enablers coming from the Fireware project and the specific enablers that they themselves developed as proof of concepts to show that the idea works. This was not yet a full trial. This was a relatively light demo, if you like, about how the mechanism could work. Now in phase 2, we go a step farther. It's not a proof of concept anymore. We go into real trial sites. Yes? I will come to that. I will come to that, yes. Yes, the question was whether I could say anything about the specific technologies in this Technology Foundation project and the Fireware project. And I will come back to that and I will give you quite some references on where you find more information about that. Actually, it will be very soon because I realize you need that also. Yeah. But just to continue on what is happening in phase 2. Phase 2, as I said, we go towards trial sites, to experimentation sites, where all the different technologies come together and where the application platforms are being built. So they will also develop test applications on top of their own platforms. And another objective is to validate, to test the whole concept behind all this, meaning this approach of having the building blocks, assembling the building blocks, and also to validate the value of these building blocks. But again, I will go in more detail about the different building blocks later on. Also, they need to prepare the ground for phase 3. Typically, the application platforms, they need to be made available towards phase 3. They need to define terms and conditions. What are the terms and conditions for the outside world to use it? They need to define where to find it, documentation, tutorials, stuff like that. And they have open calls, as Johan mentioned before. Now, we have a lot of open calls, and it is a bit confusing. So this is phase 2, currently ongoing. They have open calls to extend their consortium. Typically, they ask for technology providers, or they ask for SMEs to develop applications and services. Johan gave you the full overview of the different calls in phase 2. Here later on, I will talk about phase 3, where there is call 3, which is the commission call. We launched call 3. As a result of the projects coming out of call 3, there will be these projects, they will have open calls again, which is very confusing typically to people. So you have open calls in phase 2, you have the call 3 of the commission, and you have the open calls as part of the phase 3 projects. Here you see the different trial sites that are around in Europe from the different projects. Have a look. There is The one from Finesc, who will speak later, is over here in Malmö, and there are more. It's kind of centered towards the south and the west, and not so much in Eastern Europe. Now, how does this work? This whole idea that I presented before about coming up with platforms and using these platform components or these generic enablers. This slide shows you the different generic enablers. This slide shows you the different generic enablers that are there, and I will go in more detail later on. Simply a list. And on the different columns, you see the use case projects. You see the phase 1 use case project. So actually the slide is kind of old, but for illustration purposes, it's okay. And in the cells here, the E and the U indicate the type of use that they make. What it means doesn't really matter. It's just to make the mapping between. Now, what do we have? We have this fireware project with its technology building blocks, with its generic enablers, as they are called. They're bundled in platform products, but that's not relevant. Forget that. So you have a whole collection, a whole catalog of these technology building blocks, these generic enablers. These are made available to the PPP projects and also to the outside world, and I will come back to that. So you have these components. The phase 2 projects, you see over here, use case trials, these are the phase 2 application projects. They pick up these generic enablers, integrate them, bundle them into platforms, application platforms. Of course, they add their own functionality. If you are in the content and media domain, you add, for instance, streaming type of functionality. You add a 3D visualization type of functionality, for instance. So that is then done here as a part of the phase 2 projects. All this takes place in the Future Internet-PPP. So it is funded by the Commission, it's paid for. It's a kind of safe environment, if you like. Now, what we hope, obviously, is that it also will take place outside this safe environment, in the real world, by third parties. That's why this technology, the generic enablers, is being made available to the outside world to pick it up, to play with it, to use it. And if people want to develop their own platforms with this, that is perfectly fine, and that's of course obviously the intention. If this does not happen, if it stays in the PPP, impact will be, well, low. Now, I will now say a few words about this fireware projects, the different generic enablers, the different technology building blocks that are there. Again, here you see an overview of the different application domains that are targeted, and some specific functionalities for different target domains. Just to give one example, in e-health and safety, you might want to use big data type of functionality, machine-to-machine functionality, semantic tools, complex event processing, and so on. So this is just an overview of what you, in principle, should be able to cover with these generic building blocks. And they are structured according to a few chapters, as it is called. Cloud, just to take one, cloud enablers is one chapter. So there is a whole range of functionality in the cloud domain. Same for IoT, Internet of Things, how to make a link with the physical world. There are all kinds of building blocks for that. Apps, meaning marketplaces, registries, repositories, business simulation systems, functionality for that. Security enablers, access control, privacy-related functionality. So different building blocks for all that. And it's a bit organized like that. Now, what is available? So you have the generic enablers, and typically you have a specification, and you have an implementation. The specifications are open, which means that they are public and royalty-free. They are not yet open in the sense that it is possible to incorporate feedback from the community. This is a next step, and this has to happen as well, and this is going to be taking place very soon. So there must be mechanisms in place for people to give feedback, to improve the specification, and obviously this needs to be taken into account. but they're already available. If you go to the website of Fireware, you can find the specifications available, and you can already take them and implement them. And this implementation actually takes place for each generic enabler at the moment. By the way, if you want to know how many, it's something like 60 different generic enablers divided over these different types of chapters, these different areas that I mentioned before. I will also have a few slides about that, then you can see all of them very quickly. Now, Fireware is then developing an implementation for each of these generic enablers, partly based upon previous results, partly new results. So an implementation is available for each of these generic enablers, specifications. Now there are 60 specifications and 45 implementations. So not every implementation of a specification is made available yet. It's, let's say, work in progress. If you go to this website, the catalog, you find all these generic enablers, you find the implementation, and you find also references to the specification. For each of the implementation, there are different terms and conditions defined, and in 3 areas. First of all, experimentation testing within the PPP. In the PPP, there are contractual agreements made, which give the right for every participant in the PPP to use IPR from any other participant in the PPP, to use foreground IPR, not background IPR. Fireware Open Innovation Lab, FiLab, is an initiative that was launched this month, at the beginning of this month. And this is a sandbox environment where they make the different generic enablers available outside the PPP. So if you want to play around with this, go to the FiLab, and you can see what these generic enablers mean, what they do, what you can do with it. I will give you the details later on. But what is most relevant is external availability. What are the terms and conditions for using these generic enablers implementations outside the PPP? Now, these terms and conditions are being defined. In some cases, it is open source, and then, yeah, it's actually pretty clear. It's available to anybody to use. In other cases, you have to ask the owner. In other cases, it is yet to be determined. Now, we are going towards a situation in phase 3 where all the generic enabler implementations will be open source and will therefore be available for whoever. Yeah, well, this is a comment that the Fireware Consortium considers important. There is a large industry behind every implementation so far. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is an overview of the different enablers. For instance, in the cloud domain, you have a platform as a service management, edgelet management, and so on. So this gives you an overview within the cloud domain of what kind of functionalities are there. And perhaps the term as such does not say that much, so you would really have to go to the specification itself to see what you can really do with it, and then to the implementation. Yes, sir. Yeah, the question is whether these enablers are developed from scratch or whether they are based upon open source projects or from other initiatives.
Can I just add, please raise your hand, and we have streaming audience, so next question, raise your hand and you'll get the mic from me.
They're based on OpenStack, indeed. So all of them are made available also as open source, except one, I believe. And indeed, it's an adaptation of the OpenStack functionality. Yeah. Another area is data and context management, different enablers you see over here. And actually, this is kind of a wide set. It ranges from semantic annotation to big data analysis to video analysis, all kind of different functionalities. It's as I said, it's a kind of a mixed bag over here. Now the next one is connecting to the physical world, which is Internet of Things. And then you talk about a front end and a back end. Front end with typically protocol adapters, device management, data handling, back end, configuration management, and a broker type of functionality. If you want to know where the real innovation is, we think it is in the combination of the IoT and the cloud, complemented by other functionality. Especially going towards the real world, which you can employ, for instance, in smart city type of context. We expect that the Future Internet-PPP can make a contribution there. So this combination, and especially with the IoT part. Of course, you want to make money from it. Therefore, there are some enablers related to that. Marketplace revenue sharing system, which is a kind of simulation mechanism for different revenue sharing models. Service composition, registries, and so on. That's in the apps chapter. Privacy, security, trust, which is nowadays, you can't miss it anymore. What is there? Different types of functionality, access control, security management, identity management, and so on. Again, a large set. Some of them are kind of mandatory. You would not make a system without it. Some of them are more optional. Then the link with the network, and the underlying network. Then you can think about network information and control, and so on. Now, to find out more information about the specification, you have to go to the wiki. And here you see the link. Well, actually, the link is easier. The link is simply wiki.fireware.eu. I don't know why they put the long one here. There is a lot of information. And yes, if there is a lot of information, it is sometimes difficult to find the right information. So it requires some searching. It requires some browsing. And if you can't find what you need, I would suggest you simply contact the fireware team. There are contact details over here. And then simply ask them where to find it. It is a bit a difficult website, I must admit, but have a look if you want to know more about the specifications. The catalog is where the implementations are. If you go there, you can see all the enablers under this tab, all the 45 that are currently being made available. Okay, here is a list related to one area, and if you click on it, you get an overview like this. Overview, what do you get? So a short description of the functionality, why you would like to have it, and so on. And more details, including these terms and conditions that I mentioned before. Now, that was about the fireware project. That was about the generic enablers. That was about these technology building blocks. Another component that you need is infrastructure. In phase 1, we had the Infinity project, which looked at what infrastructures are there available in Europe. And infrastructure is actually a wide concept. It can range from, for instance, wireless networks to sensors and actuators deployed by certain cities, and so on. So it's not, let's say, only networks, it's not only sensors. It is actually kind of wide-ranging. Now, what they did is they looked at the different infrastructures in Europe, and they came up with roughly 150 different infrastructures that they analyzed, provided information about them, also provided information about how they can be used, and if you want to use them in, for instance, a project, there are also contact details for that. And this is work in progress, so the repository is not a fixed set. It's not just 150 and that's it. No, it keeps on changing, and more is being added all the time. So if you want to know more, go to the XCP portal. So that was Infinity. Sci-Fi is the infrastructure project that is currently running. It builds upon the work done by Infinity. It also builds upon the work done by fireware. And what Sci-Fi aims to do is to come up with 5, as they call it, core nodes, 5 infrastructures that are being made available for use by other people. And these 5 nodes, they will implement all the generic enablers of fireware. So they will make test beds available to whoever wants to use it. I also mentioned to you before the Phi Lab. And the Phi Lab is a sandbox, a playground, a development and testing environment where you have all the generic enablers available. And then Sci-Fi later on will be more operational environment than the Phi Lab. So in terms of functionality, it's more or less the same, but in terms of operational support, in terms of how you can really use it for more operational environments, Sci-Fi is more mature, more stable, so it gives more support, second grade, first grade support than the Phi Lab will do. Also, they intend to federate them so that more nodes can be added later on. Actually, the open call that is open at the moment asks for additional infrastructures. They ask for up to 10 additional infrastructures in order to expand the current 5 nodes from 5 to 15 or 16 different nodes. Now, how does it work a bit? So there are relations between Sci-Fi and Fireware. Here you see the different relations. As I said, they will implement the generic enablers on their 5 nodes and later 15, 16 nodes. By doing so, they are kind of validated as well, obviously. How easy is it to implement the generic enablers? How easy is it to get them, bundle them, make them available? Is it easy to install? Is there functionality missing? So feedback is being provided there. And actually we expect that these 2 projects, because of the close links, will go together very much. There are obvious links with the phase 2 trial projects. The infrastructures from Sci-Fi are being made available for the phase 2 projects, which then have a complete Fireware generic enabler testbed, operational environment, and where they can add domain-specific functionality from the phase 2 project, and therefore make the application platform available to third parties. Yes, sir. I think you need to ask for the microphone now.
Just a short question regarding these PPP standards, you call them. What do you mean with that? I think that's not a real standard, or is it recommendations from this project? What is meant with standards here? FI PPP standards, you call this bullet list here on.
Yeah. Okay, it does not mean a specification here. I think it refers to a standard in terms of quality standard. To be honest, I must admit I took this slide from Sci-Fi. Maybe I should have prepared better, but I think it refers to quality standards here. And indeed the question then is, what does it really mean? And I'm afraid I can't really answer that. And obviously Sci-Fi takes place in the governance structure like all other projects, but I'm not going in detail there. Yeah, I mentioned this also before. This is a bit how you have to see it. In Fireware, the development takes place. And in Fireware, you have the Phi Lab, the sandbox environment, for development and testing purposes. Sci-Fi is going towards deployment. It provides these 5 nodes and later 15 nodes in a more operational setting. But Sci-Fi also ends, and then it transfers these operational environments to the phase 3 project, which is called for now, Technology Foundation Continuation Project. So whatever you develop on Sci-Fi now will be made available throughout the whole FIPPP. Now, where are these 5 sites? Okay, here you see them, 5 different countries. Typically there is a large telecom operator involved. Well, have a look. If you want to know more, go to the Sci-Fi's website, and you find all the information about the different sites, how many nodes you have over there, the capacities, etc., etc. Now, how does the technical approach work? Well, first of all, they make the backbone, meaning they work on the 5 nodes, make them available. Then they're gonna deploy the generic enablers on these 5 nodes, validate the different capabilities, and then enlarge them with other nodes, and make these other nodes available as well, and federate the whole system. Now, that was about phase 1, that was about phase 2. Now I'm moving towards phase 3. The background picture I will not explain, it's a bit difficult to explain, but this slide gives you an overview of the core idea of phase 3. First you have to realize, what do we have at the start of phase 3? We have the infrastructures coming from the Sci-Fi project. There are the application platforms coming from the use case projects in phase 2, which are currently running. There are the generic enablers from the FiWare project, the scenarios from the phase 1 application projects. That is available at the start of phase 3. Now, if we go towards phase 3, there will be up to 20 projects where all this is brought in. It's made available, as I said before, everything that is developed in one project is made available to all the other projects in the program. If you add, for instance, regional policies, if you go for a regional approach, if you want to do something for your region in the phase 3 project, you would typically look at regional policies. For instance, smart specialization strategies. If you want to apply for structural funds from the Commission, you need to have a smart specialization strategy. Now, you could use a phase 3 project to leverage that. So if your smart specialization strategy says, in our region we want to be the leader in e-health technology, then you could have a phase 3 project based around e-health technology, targeting your communities. And okay, the communities come in here. And so you make a link between what the project does over here and what you want to do in your region anyway. If you take a regional approach, there are different approaches, and I will come to that. So there are the 20 projects, but 20 projects are mainly intermediaries. The whole call of this part, that's objective 1.8, the whole call is 100 million euro. Out of that 100 million euro, 80% of the funding has to go, oops, sorry again. 80% of the funding has to go to SMEs, web entrepreneur, and other small innovative actors. So in other words, these 3 projects, they get the funding, but they pass 80% on towards these SMEs and web entrepreneurs. And they do that via a mechanism that's called subgranting, and I will say a little bit about that later. And they're open calls. As I said before, there are these 3 different types of open calls. This is the first one, right? Now, these SMEs and web entrepreneurs then develop services and applications, a whole set. We expect to target something like 800 SMEs, web entrepreneurs. So you can imagine there will be a multitude of services and applications. Hopefully leading to happy users if they sell these services and applications. And if they make some money with it, that would be perfectly fine. Yes, sir.
No. Thank you. So let's say you are a small entrepreneur or working in an entrepreneurial community, and you are in a venture that you see has global potential and fit very well into this program. How could you start off the project yourself and try to collect other actors, or how to go about, because it boils down to a funding question for my venture, so to say, because since 80% of the cash should go to the people doing the work, and if you are one doing the work, how will you get access to the funds, basically?
Yeah, okay, so this is the overview of the Commission Call 3, which leads to these 20 projects. Here, you as a company or as a person could be involved, but you're not really targeted. Let's say it like that. It is more the other actors which can act as intermediary. For instance, regional development agencies. For instance, accelerators, venture capitalists. They can have that role. I will have slides about that, so I will go in more detail. Where you come in, if you are an SME web entrepreneur, is over here, reacting to the open calls launched by the projects here, launched by the regional development agency, launched by the venture capitalist, and so on. Now, the trick is, why we do this mechanism, the open calls that are currently open, the phase 2 open calls, use, let's say, the Commission rules, which are, well, bureaucratic. Not for you, typically, to be blunt. So, the mechanisms that the phase 3 projects can use here to do their open calls is open. They choose. No Commission rules. Well, some rules. I will come to that also later on. But, just to give as an example, if they say, well, just provide a 5-page document and detail what you want to do, that would be fine. In the Commission requirements, you need typically a lengthy document addressing certain predefined criteria. If they say, you don't need to define a document, we have a pitching event, you come over and you give a presentation, and that would be the basis for allocating the grants. That's up to these projects to define. And they have to make a proposal right now, and in that proposal they need to tell how they are going to do that. How are they going to make these open calls? Will it be the pitching event? Will it be a 5-page document? What are the criteria they're looking for? And so on and so on. I will also come back to that. Now, as I said, this is Information Day number 31, roughly. And this confusion about where do the SMEs, web entrepreneurs come in, was there since the beginning, especially if you have a commissioner who says this call is for startups, 100 million euro for startups. Yeah, it is in the second part indeed. It's not direct. This is the direct part. This is what we call for. And startups, SMEs, web entrepreneurs come in the second part when these open calls are being opened. And especially in the beginning when we started with these information days, this was a confusion. So I hope this is clear. Yeah, okay. Now, as I said, there are these different intermediaries. And this slide shows you a little bit more detail. So that's the guy in the middle. Huh? So they're in between the Commission and in between the web entrepreneurs and SMEs. And who is that guy? Okay, so they're in the middle. And these are examples of possible players there. Accelerators, as I mentioned before, regional development agencies, SME associations, but this is not a fixed list, so there could be others as well. Typically what we are looking for is organizations which have communities behind them, people who are used to deal with communities, people who have contact with the web entrepreneurs and the SMEs. And that could be from a regional point of view, it could be from a business sector point of view, and so on. So on the right you see how it could be structured. The regional dimension is perhaps the clearest one. You simply focus on your regional setting with your smart specialization strategy and so on. But there are also these SME associations by sector. For instance, an e-health sector association. Then they obviously launch open calls for e-health SMEs and e-health web entrepreneurs. They focus on e-health. And then there are other ecosystems possible as well. Again, here, it's not limited. If you want to do it differently, that is possible. If you want to have it completely open, that is possible as well. Now, if you want to leave it completely open, you should also wonder, does that really make sense? So, whatever you do, whatever you propose, always the key criterion is, does it make sense? If you are a regional development agency and you don't focus on your region, it does not make sense. If you are an SME association in e-health and you make open calls, it does not make sense. So whatever you do, it needs to be in line with your consortium, the players you have in your consortium. Yeah, so it needs to make sense. This is an overview of the different requirements for these intermediaries. It's an interpretation of the work program text. Now, what is leading is the work program text. Therefore, we give here the reference to the text, to the actual text. There's a lot of emphasis on the open calls. Obviously, if you want to apply for a phase 3 project, you need to be able to do open calls. Define them, evaluate them, monitoring them, and do all the administration and finance afterwards. Typically, we see a lot of emphasis by people on giving away the money, not on monitoring how it is spent. And obviously, the two go together. If you give away the money, you also should monitor somehow how it is spent. So you need to put procedures, mechanisms in place there as well. You are part of a program, so you need to know how you fit in with the rest of the program, both from a managerial and technical point of view. If you don't know all the details, don't worry. That will come during negotiation. But at least we expect some knowledge of the Future Internet-PPP. You should have an SME or web entrepreneurial community around you. That does not mean that you can have open calls only for your community. So, for instance, the regional dimension again, you cannot limit your open call to only players from your region. What you can do, for instance, if you are a city and you have certain infrastructure in place, you have certain, let's say, Wi-Fi networks, you have certain sensors in place, you can build upon that. So whatever service and application that is developed builds upon the infrastructure you have. That you can do, but you cannot say it's only for the SMEs within 25 kilometers from my city or something like that. You should be able to support these SMEs in terms of training, in terms of business opportunities, and so on. Now, you will not be alone. There is another objective, objective 1.9, where there are coordination and support actions, which have a specific role in supporting SMEs. So, as I said, it's a program, you work together with other projects, and you do that, for instance, in this. And actually, that's here. So you need to define relations with the other projects, but also beyond. For instance, again, let's take the example of the regional dimension. If you are a region and you are able to leverage structural funds or other funds from whatever source, VINNOVA or otherwise, that is, let's say, appreciated as a bonus, obviously. So these are the requirements for phase 3 consortia. And then people always ask, yeah, how to set up the consortium, should I have 20 players, and so on. Now, this is not restrictive again, it is up to you, but if you want to have some guidance, we expect that typically consortia are kind of small, 3 to 6. You need to have 3 from 3 different countries, which is a minimum rule. But we don't expect, let's say, 10 plus partners. These are typically small consortia. You also have to take into account, people immediately make the calculation. 100 million euro here, up to 20 projects, so assume 20 projects, 5 million euro per project, 80% of that for the SMEs and web entrepreneurs. So from the 5 million euro, 4 million goes to the SMEs and web entrepreneurs, 1 million euro for your project. You need to be able to do all this in that 1 million euro. So, therefore, you can't have, let's say, 10 plus partners. It would be spread out too much. I just made the calculation. It doesn't mean that you need to ask for 5 million euro. You can ask less. In certain regions, certain players are simply less expensive. But you can also ask more if you think you're quite ambitious, if you want to target a lot. Then you can ask more. So again, if you want a range, it's something between 4 and 8 million euro. Yes, sir.
A question here, since this is more managing the whole program, I guess the funding rules are different than to normally you program. You get 100% funding for taking care of this, or it's like just partial funding, or?
I will come back to that, but I will respond now. The instrument used is called the CPCSA, which means Collaborative Project, Coordination and Support Action. In fact, it is a combination of 2 instruments. When you apply for research funding from the Commission, you always need to choose a certain instrument. Collaborative Project is, let's say, the typical instrument where you do research. CSA, Coordination and Support Action, well, the name says it already, coordination and support. Why is this a combination? We expect that there is a small portion of research which could be done. For instance, if you, as a phase 3 or partnership, want to make available a certain infrastructure, with certain generic enablers, for instance, based around your city. The city example that I mentioned before, you might want to do some integration, some technology development in order to make a functionality available, the platform available to your community before you launch the open calls. That would be part of, let's say, research activities. That would be part then of the collaborative project part of the instrument. We expect this part is quite small. We expect that some consortia will have actually nothing there. And therefore all the other part is in the CSA part. The funding, sorry, the open call part, including the management, including the actual subgranting, including the actual giving away the money, is part of the CSA part. Therefore 100% financed by the Commission. Also the money you give away, the 80%, is 100% funded, obviously. Yeah.
I have a question in regard to the funding that goes to the SMEs. Are they earmarked? In what way are they earmarked? If you have any slide in regard to that.
Yeah, I will come to that because there are a few conditions that you need to define in your proposal via a special clause that is put in place. You will see that. The conditions are predefined. The SMEs are open. In that sense, they are not earmarked, if that is what you mean. I will come back to that, and if it's not clear, then please let me know. Okay, here we go. So there are these two special clauses that will be put in place. First of all, this one, it's clause 41, it's about complementary grant agreements. This typically makes your project part of the program. As I explained before, you have access to all the technology developed in the program, not only in your own project, as is normal, but in the other projects as well. That's what clause 41 is doing, so IPR. Plus it deals with, it says that there is an overall governance structure and stuff like that. The other one, which is more relevant for this call, is clause 42, giving financial support to third parties. And there are 5 points that you need to define. Basically, these 5 points determine how you will run your open calls. Now, for instance, what kind of activities will you support? So the SMEs and web entrepreneurs, what is it that you expect them to do? Typically, this would be technology development, research and technology development kind of activities. But perhaps you want to extend that. You want to extend that perhaps to demonstration or a lot of communication type of activities. You have to define that here. So what we're asking is that the phase 3 proposals, because you need to put that in your proposal, determine already how the calls will run. In other words, you can't leave it open and just say, well, we'll see that when we go for the open calls. You need to be clear on that up front. And all the other points as well. Criteria for awarding financial support. That's a bit what I said before. Is it going to be a short document? Is it going to be a pitching event? And then what are the criteria that you're going to use? All that here. Was that clear? Okay. Now, some questions we get a lot. And for that, first of all, I would like to refer to the frequently asked questions document, which you can find here. I kind of answered that part, the CPCSA instrument, after the gentleman's question there. So we expect mostly to be projects focusing on the CSA part, so the 100% funded part, and do little research and technology development. You can have that, it will be little typically. Subgranting is part of the 100% funded part, obviously. Then the other question is that we get a lot is, can you limit participation of SMEs and web entrepreneurs to certain regions? No, they must be open, but you can ask for certain skills, for instance. You cannot say only from that region, you can say we focus on e-health type of entrepreneurs. And of course you need to evaluate them. Now this one needs to use FP7 rules. I think I need to explain that a bit. Yes for the phase 3 project, no for the subgranting. What that means is, and this is a quote from the work program, the phase 3 projects have to use FP7 standards in their evaluation, meaning you don't do the evaluation yourself of the open calls. You need to have external experts, independent from you, independent from the consortia or from the web entrepreneurs and SMEs submitting. Non-conflict of interest, and of course you need to take into account that all this is confidential and the calls should be widely published. So don't keep it for yourself and your local community, so to say. So also the Commission has a role here. We need to get your information about the open calls and we publish it on our websites as well. And also VINNOVA, I guess, will do the same. Now for the subgranting, not. What does that mean? Suppose it would be. Then if an SME comes to you, to your open call, you would have to validate, is this really an SME? And if it is an SME, and he would be eligible for RTD, research and technology development type of activities, you would have to fund them according to FP7 rules. Now, that is not the case, but to be confirmed. That is not the case. What does that mean then? That means that you determine how you determine the amount of funding. If you want to give a lump sum, that is fine. If you want to use the FP7 rules, so for SMEs you give 75%, 60% overhead, that is fine. If you want to give more than 75%, that is possible. If you want to give more than 100%, yeah, then it becomes kind of tricky, obviously. But in principle, how you want to do that, you define it, and already in your proposal. Now, very quickly, some other opportunities. I mentioned it already, the Phi Lab. If you want to know more, here is the link. They will also have developer contests, hackathons, and so on. So there is also some prize money involved there. But if you want to know about the generic enablers, how they look like, what you can do with this, please go to that link over here. And yeah, it's a kind of a sandbox environment. You can play with it, you can test it, and so on. The phase 2 open calls, Johan already mentioned, so I'm not going in detail. Here is another overview for that. They are all being launched now. Actually, the information day was 2 days ago. They all have deadlines, end of November until beginning of January. So if you want to get involved there, have a look what the possibilities are. Have a look what they're asking for. There might be a good match. Also in Fireware, we had open calls, and then actually quite some SMEs responded and were brought into the consortium. Well, one of the last slides. This is about Fireware and the Phi Lab. There was a big event at the beginning of this month where the Phi Lab, the Open Innovation Lab, was officially launched. So the link I just gave was then made available. This was a big event with Commissioner Cruz at Campus Party. Now, if you don't know what Campus Party is, this was in London, and according to the mayor of London, it's a Glastonbury for geeks. If you don't know what Glastonbury is a festival. So, a festival for geeks. We were all there. People that spent the whole night programming. I mean, it's really impressive. You see at 7 o'clock in the morning, people sleeping under their desk and yeah, hacking. So they tested the Fireware generic enablers. There was a contest there, the first one. Okay, I don't have a slide for that. But the winners, for instance, were very young guys, 16, 17, 18 years old, from Spain. They developed an application that, depending on the weather, made available certain advertisements. It's well, a gadget, if you like, but it's a result of 2-day programming. So you can't really do that much in 2 days. Now, some final slides. This is a slide of a couple, an older gentleman and a younger lady. And the question you have then is, how long will this couple last? In other words, it's about sustainability. How long will this last? And there are some issues here. In the PPP, everything is arranged. PPP, safe environment, commission funding, you get paid, there's very little risk for you as a company. Now, we want this technology to be useful beyond the limits of the PPP, obviously. Therefore, if it is proprietary technology, it needs to be exploited. Open source, okay, more or less similar, but especially proprietary technology, you want the owners to exploit it. They need to give clear intentions for that. They need to also clearly state what are the terms and conditions for using their technologies beyond the borders. So we are working on that. Then, yeah, it creates also a kind of a dilemma here. On the one hand, there is the requirement to phase 3 projects to use FIPPP technology. On the other hand, if you want to use the technology within the PPP, you only do that because you also want to use it outside the PPP. And for that, you need these terms and conditions again. It is clear for, let's say, half of the technology, but not for the other half. It will become clear at the end of phase 3, because then everything will be open source. Most of the generic enablers will be open source, but at the moment, it's a bit in the middle. And same for generic enablers. There need to be truly open specifications, so there must be a possibility to influence them. At the end of the program, you might even want to transfer it to some standardization development organization. There needs to be continuity, at least. And through reference implementations. So reference implementations, via reference implementation, you can check how a specification is interpreted. The specifications are not always 100% clear, and only when you make true implementations, you can see it. So these reference implementations must be made available to the scrutiny of the public. And yeah, therefore the specification will be improved as well. Now, just to conclude, some key messages. The elevator pitch, phase 3, it represents an opportunity for some organizations, not for all. There are some certain characteristics that we ask for the players. Later on, the web entrepreneurs and the SME come into play, but not yet. We target intermediaries now. It is not business as usual. It is kind of an experiment as well. We have to be honest here. It's kind of an experiment. The way the funding is distributed via the sub-granting mechanism and the program approach, it is new. And it is a risk, and it is an experiment, and it is not business as usual. I'm not certain if there are other questions. Otherwise, here you have a few more links. Johan already mentioned the information days that we will have next week. These will be the last ones, number 33, and then we finish the series. Finished. Okay, if you want to know more, look at the websites or email us directly. I'm not sure if we have time for questions. Peter.
Thanks, Arian.